Hey y'all, it's been an incredibly busy weekend over here, so I'm declaring it casual Sunday for the weekly video. This is what I look like when I'm not trying to look like a teacher. But this week we are talking about sex and gender. And I want to start out with making a clear distinction that when we're talking about sex, we are talking about your biology, hormones, chromosomes, our sexual dimorphism, primary and secondary sex characteristics. But when we are talking about gender, we are talking about all the cultural stuff we layer onto there, all the things about roles and behaviors and what you should wear and expectations. All of that stuff is culture. So we're going to talk about those two things and also a bit on sexuality this week. We're going to start with the biology of all of this, and that is that human beings, like many other primates, do of course exhibit sexual dimorphism. This means that we look different, right, in the male and female biological model. Not only in those primary and secondary sex characteristics, things like men have penises and women don't generally grow facial hair. But we also have some things that are not so obvious. One is that men tend to have more muscle mass overall, so we think of men as stronger, but at the same time, women are more flexible than men, have better endurance, and by that I mean physically more flexible, not, in getting along with people. Physically more flexible, have better endurance, and a higher capacity for being able to manage pain. So those are the biological differences between men and women. We also, our book doesn't go into this much, but have a category that we define as intersex. This is when people's genitalia, chromosome, and hormonal balance don't match up exactly as we expect. That is somewhere between 1% and 2% of the population, so it might even include one of you all. It's something that often in the U.S. isn't particularly talked about, but that's natural variation. We see it in all species, and we also see it in human beings. We're going to spend most of our time this week, though, on gender. Gender is sort of the stuff we layer on top of that biology, and then we argue that it is biology as well. So we're going to discuss, for instance, the gender roles available in our society. We have a binary gender role system. This means that we have feminine gender roles and masculine gender roles, but not a whole bunch in between. This is not true of every culture everywhere. Many cultures have third or fourth gender options. We'll talk about some of that as we move on. So there's 4 different theories for why men and women do different things, and I'm not going to get into those in depth in this video because I want you all to do some research on that in your text and maybe in some outside sources, because that's what you're writing about this week in our discussion forum. But there is some question about, even if we look at those 4 theories, right, is the basis for those differences in what men do and what women do, is it biology or is it training, right? A lot of times folks argue that men, for instance, are more likely to do the tasks associated with warfare, that this has to do with their greater size and strength, but it also may have to do with the fact that we teach small boys in most cultures games that are connected to warfare, so they are learning those skills even when they are quite small. Okay. One of the topics we're going to look at this week is the question of who works more, men or women. And it's important to note that there is both primary and secondary subsistence. So even in a society in which men do most of the hunting and are thought of as bringing in most of the calories, all the work of both preparing all of that food for storage and cooking it, secondary subsistence work, ends up generally being done by women. Also, in most cultures that are foraging, the calories that women bring in from foraging are more than the calories men bring in from hunting. We see overall a general trend that says that women tend to work more cross-culturally. Women tend to be more equal in the amount of work that they do in food gathering or foraging societies, and much less equal. They do more work in societies that practice intensive agriculture. Now, when we look at political leadership and warfare, this is another place in which men tend to have the bulk of it. There are some societies in which women have substantially more power than we see globally generally, possibly because they are matrilineal, possibly because they are matrilocal, which means they are more likely after marriage to live with the wife's family. But even when we see a society in which women have significant personal power, we find that the men are usually more in charge. And some anthropologists argue this is because men have more interaction with the outside world, going back again to that gendered division of labor, what tasks women do and what tasks men do. Okay, the relative status of women worldwide, of course, varies. It is higher when women are involved in primary subsistence gathering and lower if warfare is a big part of one's society. We also see it's lower if we have a centralized political system, and it goes up if the residence pattern for that society is matrilocal. We find that around the world, colonialism was pretty uniformly terrible for the status of women, even in societies that started out with relatively egalitarian gender roles. The presence of colonial powers tended to enforce the hierarchical gender roles of Europe on them. Now, some folks look at our gender roles and say, well, men have one type of personality and women have another type of personality, that men are generally more aggressive. But anthropology questions this. Is it biology or is it socialization? It could be androgens, that set of hormones that we think of as being associated with men, although, of course, women have estrogens, have testosterone and the other androgens as well, and men have estrogen as well. We have all of these hormones in all of us. They're just in different balances for men and women. Part of this could be, of course, the chores that are assigned to small children, where conditioning, right, encourages young people to be either more nurturing or more aggressive, and those are the things that they are praised for. Okay, so we have biology, what the mechanics of our bodies are. Gender, the roles and behavior and expectations that are pasted on top of this. And then the last piece of this puzzle is, of course, sexuality. We tend to think of these three things as being very clearly linked up, although generally speaking, that's not always the case. All societies around the world seem to have rules that regulate sexual behavior, although they vary a ton. And the rules that govern sexual behavior, even within a single culture, are fairly dynamic. This means they change depending on people's ages, and they also tend to change over time in a society. Most societies make rules about who it's okay to have sex with premaritally. Some societies could be just about anybody. Some nobody at all. In marriage, you would think that would be clear, that you would only sleep with your married partner, but that is not necessarily true in every culture. And extramaritally, whether it's okay to sleep with people that you are not actually married to. And more societies also have rules about homosexuality. Now, our text argues that it's actually pretty rare to see folks who are exclusively what we think of as homosexual, but that many societies have a period in life in which homosexual activity is allowed or even encouraged. Societies around the planet differ in their level of sexual restrictiveness, and we also see that they tend to be more restrictive during times of population pressure. And if it's more egalitarian, we see less restrictions on sexual behavior. So, fast. But that's a quick overview of what you're going to be reading about this week. And I look forward to seeing all the amazing things you have to talk about in the forums. Let's see. And I think this week I will be grading your 7 sources that you submitted before the end of last week. Then I'll be sending them back before the end of the week with the 5 that I want you to focus on, and you can get started on your reading for your literature review. So that's what's going on this week. Sorry about the, again, not super fancy special professor close for the video. I will see you all in the forums. Bye.